very, very much. All right. Okay, so I was warned that this isn't the greatest thing in the world, so guess what? You get to experience the fact that I used to be in the Society for Creative Anachronism as a herald! And I'm also a singer. How'd you guess? First off, thank you all so very much, especially those of you who came away from other colleges to be here. I am insanely honored to have been asked to be a part of this, and it's always a total jazz for me to visit things like this. When I gave a presentation at the Furry Studies seminar up at Lutheran University in Tacoma, and I got to meet, they had a bunch of people there from Berkeley Furs, and got to spend a lot of time chatting it up with them, and I saw them again at Further Confusion this year. So, you know, I'm learning more and more about college furry groups, and it is just so much fun and so cool to see everybody getting so involved in this. But I was asked to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are now and some of what it looked like specifically back in the early days. And by the way, your illustrious leader there stated it wrong, okay? We did not find Furry Fandom. Furry Fandom found itself, okay? I joke, but I believe it's honestly true. Furry Fandom is not new. I think Furry Fandom probably goes back to the first time that someone painted a picture of Anubis on the side of a pyramid and somebody else looked and said, "Whoa, he's hot." Okay? What we did was we got together and said, you know, we should all talk to each other, because we notice this thing that everybody does everywhere, of anthropomorphizing other species and trying to other species-ize ourselves. Everybody does this in every culture for a whole variety of reasons. But we're the ones who said, you ever notice that we... And so we got together with other people who said the same thing, and we started discovering that, yeah, it was actually something very interesting to talk about in terms of a human psychological phenomenon. This is a weird thing that we do, but we all do it. Isn't that cool? So, starting off, the elephant not in the room, I would not be here without my late husband, Mark Merlino, a.k.a. Cy the Skill Tear, a.k.a. Silas Sable. I met him in 1980 when I was president of the Fountain Valley High School Science Fiction Club, and didn't realize I would wind up marrying him about a decade later. But this gentleman, I talk about him a lot, everyone knows that, but there's a reason for it besides just the fact that I loved him endlessly. This guy really led a fascinating life, because he literally was directly involved with helping to organize not one, not two, but 3 geeky fandoms, okay? Animation fandom, anime fandom, and furry fandom in order, okay? So he was really good at getting people together who had an interest in the same things that he did. His entry drug into all of this was Bambi. Mine was Disney's Robin Hood, and it went on from there. And we'll talk about that. But I'm going to guide you a little bit through some of the things that we did together. And as you can see, yeah, I really cared about him a lot. He helped me to design my fursona, and that was his fursona with mine there. One of the things that always made me sad was that he never fully acknowledged just how good of an artist he was. Hopefully not a news flash to anyone here, but furry would not be furry were it not for art, okay? We all started off as either cartoonist wannabes or drooling cartoon fans. And by cartoon, I mean animation and comics. Animation, comics, and comic strips, okay? That's where it all came from. And look what it turned into. Go ahead. So, one of the things that Mark did with a bunch of his friends, a bunch of them noticed that back in the 1970s, it's hard to imagine these days, but back in the 1970s, animation was really in a bad way in these United States, okay? And he used to joke that he was a member of ASIFA Hollywood, the International Animated Film Society, and he used to joke that they were a bunch of old people who got together and clinked wine glasses together and said, harumph-harumph, wasn't animation great? Okay? People thought it had passed on. People were talking about shutting down Disney Animation Studio because it wasn't making money anymore. And frankly, with what it was making at the time, people were kind of like, oh, well, it had a good run. That was nice. Okay? And he and several of his friends said, screw that. There's tons of animation being made, and it's really cool. It just happens to be in Japan. So he and his friends got together and started this little thing called the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, which was specifically about getting together and watching mostly Japanese animation. International from all over, but mostly from Japan. And trading tapes with people directly from Japan, because at the time was late 1970s was just when you could start buying your own video tape player as a home object rather than as something specifically for studios. So they got together and they started the first CFO in Los Angeles, meeting at the Animators Union Hall, funny that. And let me tell you one of my favorite stories, okay? One of his favorite movies of all time was called, how many people here have ever seen one of Hayao Miyazaki's first films? It's called Lupin the Third, Castle Cagliostro. Okay, cool. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Remember the clock? Okay. Well, a member of CFO happened to be an employee at Disney Studios, and they were working on this movie they've been working on for a long time called The Great Mouse Detective. And they're like, we have this clock scene and we're really terrified because it's going to be so complicated. And he's like, well, you know, there's a friend of mine, he runs this club and he's got this movie from Japan that's got a clock scene in it. And he's like, oh, why don't we bring him in to show us that scene? So Mark got to take his copy, because he was actually allowed by the studio to show that tape off, and he actually brought it into Disney Studios, and he got to sit down and he told them all, you know, yeah, it's a great scene, but you really, really ought to sit, if you've got the time, sit and watch the entire movie. So he got to sit in Walt Disney's chair, have them run the tape, and he got to show them the first that many of them had ever seen of what Hayao Miyazaki can do. And needless to say, Disney and Miyazaki have been kind of like that ever since. And if you've seen Great Mouse Detective, you know how well that scene worked out, okay? So he was actually directly involved in making that happen. He also got to meet incredibly cool people like Dr. Osamu Tezuka. Yes, the Walt Disney of Japan, and probably one of the most prolific creators of manga ever, okay? He came over several times when the Japanese studios were just starting to try to make more roads in. Now, if you don't know, Oh, I got this in the wrong order. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Who is the heck is Dr. Teska? Dr. Teska is known for creating little things like Kimba the White Lion, okay? Which again was an entry drug for an awful lot of that. I saw that when I was 3 years old. And guess what? it influenced me.
That young?
Yes, exactly. So when I met him, Mark had already started, he had labeled his apartment the Prancing Skiltare, naming it like a British pub. What the heck is a skiltare? Well, it's one of those. See what I told you about Mark's art? Okay. I met Mark at LostCon number 7, which was taking place in Anaheim. That was the Los Angeles Area General Science Fiction Convention. And it was the first convention I'd ever been to that had an art show. And among the things in the art show was stuff like this. Well, from my early days, I was an absolute fanatic for the family Mustelidae, the weaselkin, okay? And I see something like this. And these are Skiltare, which are alien Mustelidae. You have the type based upon a pine marten, and you have the type based upon an otter. Okay? And yes, the antennae are there for a reason. Okay? They are telepaths. Okay? Hello, betazoids and such. Okay? So we instantly bonded over mutual love of Mustelidae, which Cy had made the mascot of the cartoon fantasy organization. There was a particular one named Fanta. In fact, that's how he got the name of his persona Skiltare, was Fanta C. Get it? Fanta and S-Y. So he was S-Y, and the mascot was Fanta. And there she is with Dr. Teska's version of himself, this drawn by Cy Sable. Okay, see what I mean? So he had created a fanzine called the 5,000 Fans of Dr. T, which was an apazine. How many people here are familiar what an apazine was? Virtually none. Okay, all right. So if you can imagine the concept of a fanzine, an old-fashioned paper magazine made by fans for fans, but an apazine was special in that instead of you give your stuff to an editor and they pay to copy it and then sell it, an apazine is a club zine. So if you've got 50 people in your club, you type up your page of whatever you want, art, story, article, what have you, and then you make 50 copies. You all get together with the club and you collate it, everybody's page, and then everybody goes home with a copy of that month's or that quarter's or whatever's fanzine. That's called an Amateur Press Association, APA, okay? Well, 5,000 Fans of Dr. T was one of those, and that was specifically one of the first United States APAs for anime fandom ever, okay? Needless to say, what we quickly discovered without even trying, is guess what? Anime fandom, which started growing immediately. And guess what? Suddenly there were a bunch of anime clubs at colleges. Funny that. One of the things we discovered is that anime fandom was rife with anthropomorphic fans of stuff like this. So here was the flyer for LostCon 7. I think you can see why it grabbed my attention. Okay, and I told the high school science fiction club, we got to go to this thing. Okay. The guest of honor was Larry Niven, who has been guest of honor also at Further Confusion a couple of times and so forth. So if you ever wondered where the Kazin came from, that's the guy you can thank. Okay. So, boom. Again, we also bonded over our mutual love of Kim of the White Lion and other stuff that Dr. Teska had done, such as Amazing 3, which was, again, one of my very first TV introductions to anthropomorphics. Again, I was seeing that when I was like 3 years old, okay? And I said, hello. It was very, very nice of people to bring this over and have it translated and then put on syndication so kids like me could be influenced. So, also right around 1980, so I was very, very pleased to see that I was one of the few people who had actually sat down and watched this thing called Animal Olympics, which the one part of it managed to show up on TV on Channel 4 right before the Winter Olympics. They ran the Winter Games of Animal Olympics. And then we were supposed to have the Summer Games of Animal Olympics. But then Russia went and invaded Afghanistan. And everybody said, to your Olympics. So that didn't happen. So then Channel 4 chose to use that as an excuse to cancel all of their Olympic programming, including the Summer Games of Animal Olympics. In desperation, Mr. Steven Lisberger, who would later on go on to create this silly thing called Tron. But before that, he was the director of this thing, and in desperation to try to make their money back, they took the Winter Games and the Summer Games, and they kind of smushed them together into, I find personally, a very haphazard movie of the entirety of Animal Olympics. It doesn't work very well editing-wise. There's me talking film, I think. But it got it out there where people could see it at least. And they tried to get it out to theaters. Nobody took it, so it wound up on HBO, where they played it about 12 times a day. But at the time, Mark and his friends had access to an editing bay because one of them was working at a small local TV cable access channel. So guess what? They took the Animal Olympics movie and they very carefully sliced out all of the Winter Games part and sewed the Summer Games back together. So just as a bunch of fans, they had created as close as you were ever going to get to the original Summer Games as they were meant to be shown on NBC. And then Mark, it turns out, was one of the only human beings on the entire planet that had videotaped the Winter Games off of TV. So he had one of the only copies of that. So he took the Winter Games and then put that Summer Games compilation behind it. And we had what became known as the CFO split version of Animal Olympics, which, guess what? He had started showing at conventions all over the place. And again, I think you can kind of see why this caught my attention. All right? They had species in this thing like you had never seen before, okay? You don't see an awful lot of animated otters in animation, especially from back then, let alone a freaking Russian sable, okay? Mustelid fan, hello, okay? This was going to capture our attention. So again, we had a connection on all of this stuff, and it was all because of cartoons, okay? That's how I met the man who would become my life partner, was through cartoons. Now, back at this time, this is a particular apozine that was out there, okay? There was a bunch of comic book fans who were sick to death of superheroes. Even back then, okay, in the late 1970s, they were sick to death of superhero comics. which was at the time, of course, all Marvel and DC. That was pretty much it. Okay, not totally, but that's the one that everybody knew. So they said, well, what else can we talk with each other about besides superheroes? Well, what's something else that's in comic? Well, how about funny animals? Hardly anybody talks about that. Okay, let's do that. So they did, and they got together, and they started a fanzine called Voody, which became exceedingly popular among a bunch of people. This particular cover is drawn by a Mr. Dennis Kitchen. Dennis Kitchen would go on to create his own comic book label called Kitchen Sink Press, which was one of the world's biggest underground comics. I mean, all the drugs, all the sex, all that stuff, all right? That was all in Kitchen Sink Press comics. But he was a member in good standing of Voody, as was a gentleman who became friends with Dennis Kitchen by the name of Reed Waller. Reed Waller, on a challenge, on a dare from somebody else, because a very famous underground cartoonist named Tarl Wayne told him, you know, I don't think there's enough sex in funny animal comics. And Reed, as he says, being never one to pass up a challenge, created this comic called Omaha the Cat Dancer, which eventually he would start writing with his wife, Kate Worley, and that absolutely kicked open the doors for what started to be known as serious funny animals. Now, Voody petered out right around the 1980s for the early 1980s for a variety of reasons. But one of the people in it, a gentleman named Mark Schurmeister, who lives in the Valley, if anybody ever wants to meet him, he's still there. He started his own version of Voody called Rauerbrazel, based on something, the title comes from Pogo sorry, I can't talk today. Comes from Pogo the Possum, okay? Very famous comic strip. And these folks started their own funny animal APA. Among the people who have been part of this were a couple of different presidents of Asifa Hollywood. The gentleman who would go on to direct Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, he put stuff in there. And a gentleman named Stan Sakai, who put in a comic called Nilsson Ground Thumper. But eventually he started putting in this other little comic that he'd created called Usagi Yojimbo. See what we started? Back around that time, Marvel suddenly got into the swing of things and first came out, well, it wasn't his first appearance, but it was his first big appearance where he was like most of the comic. This little guy named Rocket Raccoon showed up in an issue of Incredible Hulk as a backup character. And that went over well enough that they hired this guy named Mike Mignola. Before he had ever created this thing called Hellboy, he became a hired gun to do this thing called Rocket Raccoon and on Half-World, with the 4-issue series, which, by the way, mine are signed. So yeah, I still have these and try to get them away from me. But that became a thing right about then. And something else you might have heard of started showing up right about then. Creative steps of these folks. Okay, this was serious funny animals. Okay, which is what we called it at the time. We didn't really have a word for it yet. Furry came along later. Okay. Another person who kicked open the doors, this gentleman right here, who was an illustrator for the Air Force. He drew jets and the parts thereof for a reason, okay, and for a living. But he also drew this. And this showed up at a science fiction convention, and everybody was going, "Who drew this?" Okay. This, ladies and gentlemen, and the rest of you, is Irma Felna, EDF. Eventually, he would go on to create his own comic. This is a very rare, exceedingly expensive find if you ever stumble across them. They have sold for thousands of dollars, and of course, Mr. Galacci doesn't see a dime of that. But on the market, these sell for quite a bit. This first one, Albedo number 0, was a illustrated spoof of Blade Runner with all funny animals, starring Rick Duckert. Get it? It was great. But then he went on to create Albedo as an ongoing series, mostly starring Irma Felna. Okay? And this was pure furry science fiction. Okay? We eventually discover that Irma and her friends and her associates are recombinant DNA creatures created by this long-lost progenitor who was some sort of an ape, but they're not sure what. ... Okay. So this was honest-to-goodness furry science fiction. So he was getting in the growing furry crowd, and he was getting the established science fiction group all together. Okay. Also about this time, we discovered the artwork of a young woman from San Diego by the name of Terry Smith. Okay. And one of her most famous creations was this guy right here, Chester the Ringtail. Okay. This was very, very important because A, it proved that no, furry fandom was not just a bunch of geeky guys drawing stuff. And 2, no, it wasn't just people drawing sexy, pretty, furry females. You could actually have sexy, pretty, furry guys. And it went over quite well, thank you very much. So eventually, through the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, we met a gentleman by the name of Ken Sample. He was in the New York chapter of Cartoon Fantasy Organization. And he became very, very close friends with us. And he and Mark would often share artwork, including of skill tear stuff. Now, one of the things that Mark did for his very close friends was he was create fursona skill tear for them. Here is a skill tear to represent you. So this was Mark's skill tear for himself. That's Sai, the skill tear. And then he created Tari, who's an arboreal, the Martin type, for Ken Sample. Tari because Ken was an avid gamer, and you can't see it in this shot, but Tari has the Atari symbol on his butt. It's very cute. Okay. And there's a nice picture of Fanta showing off, when that's about when I got involved with things, shortly thereafter, with the Cartoon Fantasy Organization. So again, everything was pretty much centered around anime at the time. Okay, we were going around going around to conventions of various sorts, science fiction conventions and comic book conventions, and showing off anime, as well as meeting and showing off a lot of anthropomorphic art. And then we get to 1985. Beautiful downtown Sacramento, California, okay, at the Red Lion Inn. WesterCon 38, I believe, okay. Excuse me. And here's what happened. It was the evening, Saturday night, and we're bored. A couple of Mark's friends were there, Tony Poper and Sheldon Linker, very, very active fans. And they said, hey, we want to have a party in our room. Do you want to come help us run it? And Mark said, sure, but what are we going to do for a theme? Parties always have themes to get people to come in. So what's our theme? And he said, well, you've got tapes of your animation. You've got your art books that you show off to people. We've been collecting funny animal art. Why don't we make it, a funny animal party? So we called it the Prancing Skiltare Party, naming it after our household. And we showed Animal Olympics. We showed a bunch of Warner Brothers cartoons. We showed a bunch of Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. And people loved it. Boom. 1 year later, San Diego at WesterCon 39. We decided to do it again. In the interim, in that year, 1985 to 1986, the word furry had started spreading around as a way of describing what we were into. Serious, funny animals, okay? And by the way, I always point this out to people. Funny animals does not mean funny ha-ha, okay? They're called funny animals because they were animals in the funnies, which is what we used to call newspaper comic strips, okay? Now you take the sports section, I'm going to read the funnies, okay? That's comic strips, okay? So that is where a lot of anthropomorphic animals were shown at the time, including good old things like ducks from Mr. Carl Barks, okay? And Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, all of them. They all had their own comic strips. So, serious funny animals, someone decided, hey, we're furries, and we're like, okay. So, actually, no. I should correct myself, okay? We were not furries at the time. We were furry fans. Important distinction, okay? That's a furry. That's a furry fan, okay? There was that distinction at the time, okay? That changed, as you may have noticed. But we decided to hold a furry party at WesterCon 39 in San Diego. Now, there had been parties like that before. Stephen Galacci liked to throw funny animal fan parties in his room at various conventions that he went to. But here's the important thing. Those parties were invitation only, okay? You had to be a buddy of Steve or whoever was running those parties to even know that they were happening, let alone get an invitation, okay? We put out our own flyers and said, hey, are you into these serious funny animals? Come on over, we're going to have a party. And that was our, well, some would say innovation, some would say crime. But we threw open the doors because we wanted to find other people to geek out about this stuff with, okay? Mark was a pretty good artist, but he wasn't a professional. I can barely draw, I write. Okay, that's my shtick. So neither one of us could really claim to be, looking to create a cartooning career of our own, but we wanted to meet people because we like to talk about this stuff. And so we threw open the doors, and guess what? People came in. And probably one of the things we heard most often that we found most amusing and frankly very gratifying was people would come in and say, you mean other people draw this stuff? Well, what do you think of this? And we'd be like, that's awesome. Okay. At one of the early parties, a gentleman by the name of Carl Maurer came in and said, hey, I'm going to start a fanzine. We're like, okay, fine. Knock yourself out. This was a fanzine, not an apazine, okay? So you would actually send stuff into an editor, they would copy it, and they would try to sell it, okay? So he created, being cheeky, and knowing what some people were into, he created this magazine called Furversion. har har, okay? Which did allow adult material, but wasn't exclusively adult material. And the next thing we know, he's sending out copies of number 1 to everybody that he had spoken to. And we're like, whoa, this thing's real. So we all started contributing to it, and he started handing it around and selling it to people. And this was a fun one because this was one of the furry parties at, I believe that one was Baycon. But we actually had all of the people there. So Cy drew everyone's picture at the time. This was when we first started seeing the concept of fursonas, okay? I don't know who coined that term, but it was based off fantasy role-playing game. This is your persona. Well, this is my fursona. Get it? Okay. That's Vinson the Mink, which Cy helped me to create. That's Cy the Sable. And this is another one of our partners at the time, Andre Johnson, Andre Tiger, who is, of course, napping, because that's what he did at parties. And this down here at the bottom, that's Carl's fursona. I forget his name. I totally apologize. But there he is assembling the fanzine. Okay. Bestiary, that was another one with, again, featuring artwork from Ken Sample. Ken became very, very popular very quickly. So I remember it to this day very precisely. After putting on furry parties up and down at various conventions, comic book conventions, science fiction conventions, sometime in early 1988, Cy came to me and said, so you think we're ready to run our own convention? And I said, yeah, I think we could do that. And that's how it happened. We decided we're going to try a convention themed around anthropomorphics, themed around furries. And we put our heads together with our friends and came up with the name Conference, the Anthropomorphic Convention and Seminar. It was very important to say and seminar because it was not at the time meant to be just, hey, let's get together and party for a weekend in a hotel. It's let's teach each other how to draw. Let's teach each other how to make costumes. Let's teach each other how to make sculptures, etc., etc. Okay. We didn't know if it'd work, so the first one, hesitantly, we called Conference 0. This is our test run. Okay. Little hotel across from South Coast Plaza, Costa Mesa, California. Holiday Inn at the time. 1989 January. 2 days only, Saturday and Sunday. Okay. 100 people signed up, 65 of them showed up. We said, well, that worked. So this was our very, very first convention book, what we called a souvenir book. Lots of conventions had convention books, but what their convention books mostly were was articles about the guests of honor and maybe a short story by one of them. And we said, well, why don't we're an art-themed fandom, we know that. Why don't we create a collection of art as a souvenir for people to take home? So we did that. So we put out a call. This is done by a local artist, Steve Martin. No, not the comedian. That's his version of Sidney Fisher, which is another character, not a fursona, but an OC that Mark had created to entertain Ken Sample, who is a fan. Ken is, shall we say, diminutive. He's not going to be mad at me for saying that, because he is. And he's very fond of large women. So we created a large anthropomorphic fisher named Sidney for him. And he wound up putting him on our first t-shirt. That is the first conference t-shirt that Ken Sample created for us. And that's his version of Sidney Fisher. Mine unfortunately dissolved in the wash about a decade ago, but I have a couple of my very old conference shirts, including this one. This was drawn by David Bliss, who is another frequent members. So, again, we're talking early 80s, Conference Zero. We get to see one of the very first regular full-body furry costumes, okay? Created by a gentleman named Robert Hill. Lived not too far from here, okay? There was a gentleman in the Southeast named Jerry Collins, who was a terrific furry artist, and he created his stories. He created, among other things, this species known as the Hakuhasan, who in his universe, humans had cheekily named the Bambioids because they were anthropomorphic red deer. Okay? And so Robert, with the help of some friends of his who, like him, had worked in the costume department at Disneyland, Robert very famously once was Winnie the Pooh for many, many years at Disneyland. But he created his own costume based on the Hakuhasan. This is Hilda the Bambioid. And then he started showing up at science fiction conventions, as you can imagine, gathering quite a bit of attention. And he was one of exactly 2 fursuits that showed up at Conference Zero. Think about your average furry convention these days. What does it look like? And we had 2 at the first one. I love that. Boom. So that worked. 1 year later, same hotel, we decide to do it for real, and we wind up with Conference 1. About 150. So we had almost doubled. And we got a little more ambitious with our souvenir book, and attracted a lot more artists into it. And again, starting to push the concept of fursona. This was something that Mark actually commissioned Ken Sample to do, demonstrating what, I think without even any words, this gets across the concept of what a fursona is supposed to be. Okay? Here is a furry that is me. This is when we started inching away from being furry fans and started becoming furries. Okay? Important step. Also, not long thereafter, Disney started creating this thing called the Disney Afternoon, because they had looked out there and noted there was this market, which was very, very profitable, of people putting together old cartoons to catch the kids coming home from school crowd. Okay? So 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock before the parents came home from work was great time to catch kids on TV. Well, Disney said, hey, we want some of that action. So they took some of their Saturday morning cartoons that they had started and some new ones that they created and put them together in this block and started sending it out everywhere. Well, this was a gold mine for us, as you can see. So guess what? Some of the creators of some of this stuff were actually some of our first guest speakers at early conferences. People like Jim Megan and Tad Stones, Mark Zasloff, people who created, Greg Weissman, creator of Gargoyles, so forth. These were some of our early guests. Okay. Yes. Conference for back in the days of hair. Where does it go? Where does it go? I think that's it. Yep. So that's where we came from, and look around you. This is where we went. So, again, I'm tremendously honored to have been asked to do this, and needless to say, if people have questions or if they want to get in touch with me, I'm more than happy. Oh, personal plug, actually 2 of them, okay? Quick personal plug for 2 things. I changed that. Year 2000, at one of the last conferences, we created, we did a fan poll for the greatest furry movies of the 21st century, of the 20th century. We shouldn't do the 21st yet. Greatest furry movies of the 20th century. And put that out, and then we decided to turn that into an annual thing, the Ursa Major Awards. We just closed voting this last weekend. If you're interested, the presentation I will be giving at for the awards at Las Vegas FurCon Friday night, and you can go to www.ursamajораwards, all one word, .org, and find out more about that. Second plug, what I do through most of the year is I have my own website, which I call infurnation.com. That's all one word, infurnation.com. And what I do is announcements, okay? You can look it up now. I talk about upcoming movies, upcoming comics, other projects, just anything that is of interest. It's not really a review, because I don't want to get into the politics of that. It's an announcement thing. So I talk about, hey, here's something coming out. Take a look at it. You decide if it's good. Okay. But I'm rather proud of that. It's also bounced on Flayra.com. So if you ever go to Flayra.com, down in the lower right-hand corner, you will see Infurnation, and that is my thing. Okay. And number 3, some years ago I should tell the whole story. There was some Fanish friends of mine who lived a couple of blocks over from us who started a regular Fanish party every month. And the gentleman who owned the house, his wife was a furry. I say was, not, they're both around still, but they're living in Washington now. Because he worked for Boeing, and Boeing said, guess what, you're moving to Washington. Okay. So he did. So we volunteered to take over running the party for them. Well, the party, thanks to her, had become largely about furries. So we moved it over to our house, retitled it the Prancing Skill Tear Party, and we have been doing it virtually every month ever since, except during COVID. Okay? That's roughly 25 years now. No, 30. 30 years. Okay? Every second Saturday, we put open our doors to virtually anybody who is of a Fanish sort. And everybody is welcome. 2 to 10 p.m. at our house in Garden Grove. And if anybody is interested, I'm more than willing to give information about that. So, with my plugs out of the way, if people do have any questions, I'd be more than happy. I'll be sticking around as long as everyone here would like me to stay. And thank you all very much to the organizers for having me, and thank you all very much for being here. So questions from the floor? Anyone? All right, that's fine. I'll be around.
Well,
Yes, oh, yes.
So I saw that most of the development started in California.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like during that same time period there was other hotspots in, say, the United States or other countries that also found their enjoyment and enthusiasm for anthropomorphic characters in cartoons?
Yes. As I said, you cannot get around the fact that furry fandom and anime fandom were inextricably tied. Okay, so pretty much everywhere that anime fandom started popping up, which usually was a place where there was a college nearby, furry fandom started popping up. So I think the first out of California chapter of the CFO was New York. Shortly thereafter, there was one in Atlanta, one in Austin, and then one in Chicago. And that was kind of the trifecta. And then guess what? That's the places where furry fandom started popping up. New York wound up being kind of a central hub for, there was actually, the fandom extended into New Jersey and also as far as Philadelphia. So that was a little buzz of bees right there. And from there, it just started expanding all over the place. So yes. Anyone else? Yes.
I have a question for you. So as someone who has been very involved creatively with such a huge fandom, what advice do you have for some of our creatives in here? For example, one of our majors is entertainment art and animation. Do you have any advice for any students here that would like to get more involved creatively with the fandom? How to put your name out there? Anything that, any way to, I guess, put your best paw forward?
Suffice it to say, there are some models to follow. There's this young lady I've heard about who goes by the name of Vivzy Pop. You know, who I can to some extent say, I knew her when, because I met her at some animation trade shows back in the day when she just had this little table in the corner, and she's like, well, I got these ideas I'm working on. Damn right she did. Man, I guess that the number one thing is what people always tell me with my own writing and with my songwriting. The best advice is don't make it perfect, make it exist, then make it perfect. So, you know, get it out there, even if it doesn't look like you imagine it at first. Get it in front of people, and people will start taking notice because people notice. It's the old joke about fandom. Never mind furry fandom. It's an old joke about fandom that people say, you know, one of these days I'm gonna. Well, guess what? People will notice when you do. They won't notice when you talk about it. Okay? So get stuff in front of people. And I will make this plug right now. This may be controversial. I apologize, but I'm going to make this statement. Do it, don't AI it. Okay? No one, okay, I'm going to say this is bizarre, but this is my take on things, okay? AI is collage, okay? Technically speaking, how many people here have ever taken specifically, I mean, I know you've taken stuff like this, but specifically a Photoshop class? Okay, did you do that exercise where it's like, I want you to go out on the internet and grab a whole bunch of pictures and make them really small and then turn them into something that looks like a picture? You know, by making, take your own face and color it a bunch of different ways and then make a picture out of it. You know, one of those photo mosaics. That is AI, okay? It's grabbing pieces from all over and then it does not make, it assembles, okay? So guess what? If you want to be noticed, don't assemble, make. That's my plug, okay? Man, I could give advice, but there's so many people that have jumped so far ahead of me these days because there's so many people actually out there doing it, you know. I mean, Vivzy Pop, she's such a fantastic example of this because she had her own product and developed her own fandom, and then Hollywood came calling, okay? You know, so you know, talk about directing your own terms, you know, because she had it built up behind her already. So, you know, there's a great example. But I mean, on the one hand, you know, yay for her. On the other hand, she's practically old news at this point because look at YouTube. There are so many other people doing projects out there. Even, you know, even people who have been at it for a while. Aaron Blaze, director of Brother Bear, you know, he quit Disney, he retired from Disney basically, and he's doing this thing where he's doing online animation school, but he also decided, you know what, I'm going to do a short cartoon myself. And he did. It's called Snow Bear. It's fantastic, okay? If you haven't seen it, look up Snow Bear. It is a great, great animated short, okay? And, you know, he's a veteran, but he's doing this stuff on his own. And other people, Andreas Deja, John Musker, I've seen a bunch of stuff that these people have done just on the side, okay? And then Pixar has their thing where they'll walk up to various, anybody got a short they want to show us? And guess what? Then they're putting it on TV, okay? Bunch of great stuff has come out of that from them, you know? So, you know, get it, that's my long answer, shortened, get it in front of people. Whatever it is, get it in front of people. That's my best advice. Yes?
For that advice, does that apply to fanfics? Because I have like 3 of them on an AO3 account.
Yes, yes, but you have to be, the trouble, particularly with writing, the trouble is getting lost in the noise. So you have to be able to song and dance to get them in front of people. Otherwise, you know, it's like, you know, yeah, I've written fanfics, so have 25 other people this afternoon, you know, so you have to be able to really get out there and you know, talk on the boards, talk on the socials, and sell it to people. You know, say, hey, what is this about? What is it? Fanfic of?
Based off fairy tale.
Oh, nice, cool.
You're a fan?
I'm a Zootopia fan, so you know.
I mean, fairy tale has a talking cat.
Yes. So, but that's the thing is, there is a fandom for that specifically.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you have to you have to specifically say, hey, not just hey, I've written a fanfic. Hey, I've written a fanfic, and you should read it because it's cool. Why is it cool? Because
It's an adventure story.
well, no, I'm just saying. Well, thank you for filling that in. But I'm saying to them, you have to then fill in that sentence. Okay,
Right.
that's the song and dance. That's my recommendation. Is, you know, it feels cheesy, but get used to song and dance. We're fans. We're very good at being annoying. So.
Wow, never thought being annoying would be a good thing.
Take a class in sales.
No,
They show you how.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. I saw a hand over. Oh, yes.
I've been really getting into Star Trek lately, so I've been like reading like the old like stuff from the 80s and the 70s, and it's like pretty much the same, like with like the new stuff. You think that's the same for like furries, or have we changed like a lot?
Oh no, we have changed considerably. Very, very much. People always ask me, what's the biggest change that you've seen between early fandom and now? And that's easy. Okay, I will tell you the biggest change between fandom. When I started in fandom, we were into the stuff I showed you up here. Okay? There were the creators and there was fans like us, and we were drooling all over. Well, guess what? We became the creators. So guess what? Now we're not into the stuff that Hollywood gives us, and the stuff the publishing houses give us. We're into stuff that we've written for each other, or drawn for each other, or suits made by each other, and so on and so forth. We're into each other's OCs. We're animating each other's OCs and stuff like that. So that's different, okay? It's like we formed our own anime studio around the world, and we're all employees, okay, all at once. That's really different, okay? It's a bit scary. It's certainly scary for Hollywood. That's why they're constantly knocking on our door for, do you have any new ideas this week? Yes. How much? You know. So every time somebody new comes into the fandom, they're a wealth of inspiration for whatever they come up with. If they do the song and dance and get it out in front of people, and if people want to share that, then people can take that and run, you know. And people have started their own animation companies that way. People are starting their own game companies that way, and they've got stuff all over Steam. People have started their own costume companies that way, and now sports people are coming to them for mascots, because guess what? Furries do it better, etc. Okay, so that's number one thing, is we can actually, you know, we are becoming, this is not a brag, it's just an observation. We are a commanding force in the creative arts, because guess what? The stuff that we do is less boring. You're welcome. Yes?
So I have a question mostly about kind of the then and now. What do you like out of the fandom right now? It could be creative-wise, or just things that are new to you. And what are things that you experienced back then that you wish you saw more of now?
Oh, let me reverse that, because I can tell you one of the things, people ask me what I miss, and what I miss is some of the old IP. People ask me, when did you realize you had become an old fan? And I'm like, first off, thank you. But the answer was simple. I realized I had become an old fan when I threw out a Bugs Bunny joke in a room, and I was met with, and I'm like, well, you've seen those old Bugs Bunny cartoons? And they were like, no, we haven't. And I was like, some of the old stuff is really cool, you know? If you don't, how many people, this is one of my sermons, okay? Be ready, children. How many people in this room know what I'm talking about if I invoke the term the 9 old men? Good, good, okay, great, okay. The 9 old men were kind of the brain trust of Disney animation. Disney joked about, yeah, I've got these 9 old men who follow me around and bug me about stuff, okay? When you look at a fursuit, okay, this design, okay, this design is based on what came out of the pencils of the 9 old men, okay? I can guarantee that, okay? I joke about it, but it's true. People say, aren't furries a bunch of people who want to be people who want to be animals? And I'm like, no, we don't want to be animals. We want to be cartoon characters. Okay? Disney designs are the gold standard. They are the archetype of what animation around the world. And I'm not making this up. Anime people will tell you that, okay? People say, oh my gosh, Lion King ripped off Kimba the White Lion, which is possibly true. But guess what? Kimba the White Lion was Osamu Tezuka trying to create his own Bambi, because he grew up with that, okay? It is simply stated, Disney is one of the main places that designs of what we think of as anthropomorphic animals came from. And you take those designs, and that is one of the main bases where things we call fursuits came from. So If you have not before, for heaven's sakes, Google it. Google image the 9 old men and look at their sketches, okay? I cannot emphasize enough how inspiring it is to see where some of this stuff came from, okay? You know, I think I went through puberty looking through the Mark Davis's original designs for the Country Bear Jamboree, okay? Which unfortunately they didn't do a really good job of translating them into the robots, but the original sketches were like, oh my, okay? And several other things that they designed. Ken Anderson's designs, original designs for Robin Hood, okay? Beautiful, beautiful stuff, okay? Some projects that never happened, like Chanticleer, okay? Wonderful, wonderful stuff that came out of these people, okay? And of course, they taught, there was a group came after them called the 20 Middle-Aged Men, one of whom was this guy named Don Bluth, okay? So you see, it all goes down from there. And then when those people started getting old and getting ready to retire, they brought in a new group of young people who included people like Andreas Deja and Glenn Keane and Mark Penn and all of those people, okay? Tom Cito, okay? You know these names, okay? You see them in a lot of credits, okay? So again, just the root of an awful lot of what we do goes back to the 9 old men. So yes, I do see value in Disney stuff, even though it's old and it's created by an evil corporation and bloody and all of this stuff, which is all true. But guess what? It's cool, okay? So I really, really want people to look at some of the older stuff and see what the value of it is as art, okay? Purely as art. Now, flipping it all over back to the other half of your question, stuff that's new that I like. My gosh, furries in the community. Colleges and cities, you know. I mean, there are more and more people are showing up, fursuits groups at pride parades, fursuit groups at walks for various and sundry medical charities and such. Anybody here done the ALS walk? It's a big thing in this area, okay? They have like 20 fursuits that gather every year. And that's dedicated to, not Lemon Brat, Dogpaw, thank you. I couldn't remember it, thank you. But, I love seeing furries getting out and involved in the community. I love seeing people doing their own animation. And again, by their own animation, I mean actual animation, not something that AI cooked up in a minute, okay? I like the dances. I should say the dance competitions, because I love how people can, my gosh, what people can do in these things and not fall over is great, you know. I'm an old man, so I'm kind of out of the competition myself. But I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry I was so long-winded there. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
As you and Mark have like hosted Prancing Skill Terror, being like a hub for me for the local fandom, do you have any thoughts or wishes for the like future of the furry fandom, specifically locally here in like SoCal?
Oh, well, I may be spilling the beans a bit here, but one of my dreams still is the concept of an international museum of furry fandom, and which selfishly would double as me getting my old dream of having a book and comic book shop. Just happens to be of a particular flavor, but then it would also, as an adjunct, be a museum about furry fandom. And I am bound and determined that if I am going to be involved with a museum of furry fandom, it is going to be within the city limits of Garden Grove, California. Because, and if this is me bragging, I will apologize, but I feel that our household has become something of a fanish institution, because not just furry, but a whole bunch of stuff, as I explained with my short bio of Mark, a whole bunch of stuff that has come out of his household has been part of fandom in general. So I feel that our household is something of a fanish icon. So people say, well, why don't you just make your house into a museum? I'm like, because our neighbors would kill us. Parking is bad enough on our street as is, okay? Now, there is precedent for stuff like that. Forrest J. Ackerman, one of the greatest fans who ever lived, guy who created Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, and collected stuff. He created this thing he called the Acker Mansion up in, I think it's in Tarzana, city of Garden Grove. I'm being pushy, but that's my thought. So that is my hope personally. As is, I just, please give me a call when one of you gets a deal with Netflix. And trust me, there is somebody in this room who will. Okay? I guarantee it. And hey, more power to you. And with that, I think thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. We actually have this card for you.
Oh, thank you.
It's upside down, sorry.
Oh, whoa. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I will certainly frame this.
Aww.
Thank you so much. We're super honored to have you.
Thank you. And yes, at the first furry convention, hugs were a thing.
All right, guys.